friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Hello Bluebird's Sabrina, Spooky Text, and Peekaboo stamps. So I've stamped those images out on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink. And I'm going to be coloring to match some pattern paper from the American Crafts Farmstead Harvest 6x8 pad. So I'll pull out a sheet and tuck that behind my cardstock panel so I can pull out my Copic colors from there. So I'm going to start with her skin, and I'm going to do a medium light Caucasian skin color. I wanted to tie in that peachy tone that is in the pattern paper in those little flowers. So I'm using E00, E11, and E13. Starting with that E13 for my shadows up under her hairline, down the right side of her face, on the tops of her ears, anywhere where that big hat would be casting a shadow, a little bit on the side of her nose. I'm going to make sure her neck is heavily shadowed, and then a little bit where her cuffs of her sleeves are overlapping her hands. Blending out with the E11 and then using the E00 for the highlight. And then I'm going to add in some rosy cheeks with the R02 and blend that out into the skin tone with R01. Next, I'm going to work on her hair, and because we have some golden tones in that pattern paper, I wanted to go with a golden sandy blonde. So I've pulled out E50, E51, E53, E55, and E57. And I know that 5 shades might seem excessive to some, but this hair is drawn very detailed. We've got lots of little streaks in it. So I wanted to do it justice. These are the kind of images that I absolutely love to color and practice on. And hair is something that I'm still learning how to do. And I do color it a bit different than I color most other things. I typically color darkest to lightest, but with hair I like to start with my lightest shade and kind of build up to the darkest, just so I make sure that I leave plenty of room for highlights because I don't want to lose that texture. So I started with my E50 and started to, put in where I want those shadows to go. Up under that hat brim and down the back of her neck is where I really want the deepest shadows. And then I'm building my way up to the E55. I'm going to skip the E57 on this initial first layer just because I don't want those darkest areas to get too blended out. So I'm working my way back down in the reverse all the way down to the E50, just bringing that color further toward the ends of her hair where I eventually want my lightest highlights to go. And then once I am happy with how that is looking, that is when I'm going to start to add in that darkest shade, the E57. And when I do, I'm going to use the very tip of my marker. I'm holding my marker almost straight up and down so I can get those very thin little strokes so I don't get too heavy-handed with this color and lose all of the highlights. I want it to be blonde, not brown. So I'm just being very careful with the amount of that I put in. So once I've kind of laid that out, I can start to blend that out in the reverse. And it did take me a few layers of coloring to get this how I wanted it to be, and that is totally fine. Hair is super shiny, it has a lot of life to it. It's drawn in a very artistic way. It's not just a blob, it's got a lot of movement that I want to illustrate and kind of draw attention to. So I just took my time with it and had fun, and I left the entire coloring process in, even though it was a little bit long, because I wanted you to see that it's not something that I just do very, very quickly. Even for somebody like me that's been coloring for over a dozen years with Copics, I still take my time on images like this, with hair like this, and try to get the best results that I can. I'm still not that comfortable with coloring hair. I love to do it, but I still need a lot of practice, I feel like. But I really enjoy the process, and so I try not to be too hard on myself. And in the end, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out, especially as the rest of the image gets colored and all of it comes together. I'm going to move on to her dress, and I wanted to do kind of like a dusty blue to match that dusty blue gray that's in the pattern paper. So it's not going to be a perfect match. I didn't have any Copics that would make a perfect match. I don't think there are any, but I tried to at least kind of tie that color palette in. So I'm using the B90s because they do have a lot of gray tone to them. So they're very desaturated, which, you know, that blue gray that is in that pattern paper is also. So I'm using B91, B93, B95, and started with the B95 to do my shadows. And there are a lot of things that would be casting a shadow on that dress, with the little pumpkin and the overcoat that she's got on and her kind of cowl neck line. So I needed to have those shadows in there, but I just tried not to get too heavy-handed with them, because the darker I color it, you know, the less it's going to match that pattern paper. So I wanted to keep the coloring very soft. So I just made plenty of room for the highlight, and, you know, tried to keep the shadows to a minimum. And then I did her bow on her hat to match. And then I'm moving on to her little witch's hat. And I decided to go with some neutral grays for that. I'm using N3, N5, and N7. Starting with the N7 in the little crook of the bend of her hat as it's kind of like flopped over, and where all of those little creases are drawn. And then also on the edges of the brim. I'm going to come down and do her little coat and put a shadow on the underside of her sleeve. Also where the sleeve is kind of bunched up on the top of her elbow, and then down the back side of the right, and then on the inside edge of the left where it's closest to her body. And then I'll blend that out with the N5, just making sure to color over the edge of that N7 and kind of drag that darkest color into this mid-tone so that I get a nice smooth blend. And doing the same on her jacket, just always grabbing the edge of that darkest shade and pulling it with me as I continue to color, but also making sure to leave a nice area for the highlight, because, you know, to have more dynamic coloring, you need to have those deep shadows, but you also need to have those nice bright highlights, and that's what's going to create a lot of contrast, and that's just how I prefer to color. So I did make one little error here. I decided that she should have a shadow underneath her right sleeve. It was too bright there. So I just went back and added a little extra N7 and then blended it back out, and I liked that look much better. For the underside of her hat, I wanted to go just a little bit lighter, so I brought in N1. And I'm going to skip the N7. So I'm just starting with the N5 for the darkest, blending out with the N3, and then using the N1 on the edges where that light would be more reflected. And then I also wanted to give her some little tights. You could have colored them to be skin if you wanted to, but, you know, it's cold at the end of October, so I decided to give her some light gray tights. And I used N0, N1, and N3 for that. I'm going to go with some red boots to try to tie in that darker red floral in that pattern paper. So I'm using R35, R37, and R39. The R35 adds in kind of like a brighter coral, which is going to tie in those brighter orangey red flowers. So it's kind of like a combination between those darkest red and the more coral red, combined in the little boots and also on these fall leaves, which I'm going to add the same shades to. Next, I'm going to tie in the little orange flowers in that pattern paper with some orange shades using YR12, YR14, and YR18. So I'll add some of those to each of the leaves and just kind of blend that into the shades that I already have. Or on that middle leaf, it's going to be just the orange, but I'll leave space for some other shades to blend into. And then I'll also do the little pumpkin candy container, just adding that shading on the right hand side in those lines that are drawn and blending out with the YR14. And then I'm going to leave my highlight for the center and then also the left hand side just to match the way that I had colored the little girl with the shading on the right and the highlight on the left. I brought in Y26 to tie in some of those golden leaves and colored in the rest of my fall leaves with those. And then for the handle, I'm tying in the olive green with YG93 and YG95. And then I wanted the little cat to be a different gray than the little girl's coat and witch hat. So I decided to go with cool grays. I used C3, C5, and C7. So the C7 is going to be my darkest. If you wanted him to be even darker, you could go with C9. But I didn't want to get too dark. I wanted to make sure you could still see the features there. So started with the C7, blended out with the C5, and use the C3 for the highlight on the center of the face. I thought about leaving a little white muzzle and a little white tip on the tail, but then I figured it didn't look like a traditional black cat, so I just went ahead and filled that all in. And then I'm also going to use those shades to fill in the face of my little jack-o'-lantern basket. So I'm just shading the same way that I did with everything else, with the shadows on the right and the highlight on the left. And then I just wanted to give that little kitty some rosy cheeks too and fill in the insides of her ears. So I went back to the R02. I didn't bother with the R01 because she's a bit darker and just needed that brighter shade. And then I used my Sakura black jelly roll pen to go over the eyes of my kitty and my little girl to make them bright and shiny, and trimmed them out with the matching dies. Next, I'm going to work on my focal panel, and I've trimmed down some black licorice cardstock from Lawn Fawn with the Hello Bluebird nesting ovals. And I'm going to take an MFT Rolling Hills stencil and some white pigment ink and add some clouds to that. And I'm just using a finger dauber because that's what I've used for this white ink in the past, and so it's already got white ink on it. But I'm just turning that stencil and creating a little kind of spooky sky with the fog kind of rolling in there. It'll just kind of look like a misty evening. So I'm just turning that stencil, like I said, and lining it up in different positions, working my way down that panel, and just trying to add a little bit of ink. I don't want to get too heavy-handed with it. And then I'm going to take the MFT Drifts and Hills stencil and use that to create a little ground for them to stand on. And then I'm going to go all around the edge to give that a nice glow and just add a little bit of extra white ink to the edges to define them a bit more. So once I was happy with how that was looking, I also die cut some of the dies from the Build-A-Boo die set from Hello Bluebird out of more black licorice cardstock. Actually use the same panel there. And I'm going to do this same treatment, just going around the edge with that finger dauber and kind of giving them a little bit of a spooky look. Just by having that contrast with the white edges on the black. And I'm also making sure to kind of add a little bit to the centers where any of the little cutouts are, which is also a good reason to use those little finger daubers because you can kind of get in those smaller spaces a bit more easily than with a larger foam blending brush. So I'm also going to trim these out of some white cardstock off screen. I'll show you those in just a little bit, but I wanted to create some more contrast. But there's how those are looking right now. So I can set those aside to dry, and then I'll start to work on the rest of my sentiment, which I am going to heat emboss on more black licorice cardstock. So I just treated that with my Rabbit Hole Designs powder tool first to eliminate any static cling, and then stamp that down with Versamark ink. And then I'm going to coat that with some Lawn Fawn white embossing powder, tap off any excess from behind, and then heat up my heat gun off to the side for about a minute, and then bring it to the cardstock. And I like to do both the back and the front to try to eliminate any warping. And then I'm going to pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using Lawn Fawn Fake Tan cardstock and Pumpkin Spice ink. And this is where I'm bringing in the spooky text stamp set. So the little jack-o'-lantern and the sentiment are both from that. And it says, "May your treats be many and your tricks be few." So now I'm going to go back to that Farmstead Harvest pattern paper pad from American Crafts and just pull out a couple more prints that I want to use in combination with the one that I used for my coloring inspiration. So I've got that kind of gold print with tiny leaves on it, and then I have this kind of coral pink with little polka dots, and I'm just flipping through to make sure that that's all I want to use, but that is. I'm going to just trim down these 3 pieces, which I think pull out the different colors of that main piece really nicely. So now I'm ready to start assembling, and first I'm going to add that main floral print to the entire front of the card. So I just use my paper trimmer to trim that to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 to fit the entire front of the card. And then the little coral piece is 2 1/2 by 4 1/4. And I'm going to put that down toward the bottom with just a little bit of the print behind kind of poking through. And then the gold print I trimmed down with another one of the nesting ovals, just the next size up, to create a little gold frame around that focal panel. I'll glue those 2 together, and then I'm going to add some Scotch 3M foam tape to the back so that I can pop that up and give it some dimension on the scene. And I just wanted this to have kind of like an old world feel. It almost made me think of like an old brooch with the little gold rim and then the little girl in the center. So I'm just going to make sure that's lined up nice and straight and adhere that toward the top of the card. And then I can bring in my little witchy girl and her kitty and just make sure that I have this spacing how I want them. And then I can adhere those down to the little black, it's almost like a little cameo, except not because it's in color, but that's what it was reminding me of. And then I'll add the little kitty right next to her on the ground. And then I have those 3 little colored leaves to help me kind of set the scene and just tie in more of that pattern paper. So I'm going to add 1 on either side, on the left and the right. Just tuck those in behind the images while they're still wet so I can lift them up. And then I have a 3rd little one that I'm going to put down kind of between their feet. And I'm just using my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue for all of that. And then I can bring in my little bits for my sentiments. There you can see I have both the black and the white of that Build-A-Boo die. And I'm going to adhere them so that the white just has a little bit of a drop shadow behind the black, just to make them stand out a bit more. So I'm just kind of gluing them so that the drop shadow falls to the right of each of the little letters, or in the center case, it's going to be the little skull. There's a bunch of different dies in this set, so there's other pumpkins and ghosts and an exclamation point. So you can replace both of the O's, you can do one of the O's, or you can just use the little dies on their own, but I thought the skull was kind of fun and different, so I decided to use that. So once I have those all glued together, I can kind of figure out the placement of everything. So I'm going to start with my sentiment strip, and I did give that the same treatment as the letters and the little oval focal panel, just adding that little bit of white ink around the edges. And once I have that lined up, I can figure out the placement of my word boo. So I want that to be just above, and I've popped those letters up on foam tape and then left a little spot at the top of the skull for some liquid glue where that is going to overlap the, I keep wanting to call it a cameo, but just, you know, that oval focal panel. And I did shift that one colored leaf because it was going to be mostly covered up where it was. So I just put it over on the other side where it would show a bit more. So we get that nice little splash of color. And then I'll add the O, and I'm just trying to make sure that the letters are spaced about the same width apart from each other. To finish this card off, I just wanted to add a few little gold sequins to give it a bit of shine. So I added 5. I have 2 larger and 2 smaller, 3 in the top left, and then 2 toward the lower right. So I'm just going to make sure that those are adhered well with that glue. And then I'm going to add a little bit of stickles as well. And I decided to put it on those dusty blue parts of her outfit. So the little ribbon on her hat, and then also on her dress. Just carefully kind of working around the other images and fixing any that goes over the edge with my fingernail. And then I also added some to the fall leaves, and I'll fill in the centers of the sequins as well, just to add a little extra sparkle. So that is going to finish this one off. So I'll lift that up so you can see all of the detail and give you another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. I just had to get one more Halloween card in before the big day, which is tomorrow. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Make sure that you have your notifications turned on if you want to be alerted whenever I post a new video. All of the products that I use will be listed and linked in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have an absolutely amazing day, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.